Yesterday, I mentioned the first level of awakening, Kensho. And Kensho in Japanese is like we would say in English, awakening or realization. If somebody said to you, "Oh, I had a realization," that would mean something, but it wouldn't be very descriptive. You'd want to find out more information. And so in my teaching, I've differentiated a little further where I use the Japanese term Satori for a deeper realization. A Kensho is an initial realization, typically of a short duration, and has some effect, some impact afterwards, but it depends how long the process takes, how long the sense of self is suspended. And if it's a short time, meaning a few hours or a day, it's not a big impact. If it goes to days, weeks, or months, then it really can have quite an impact when it returns because it doesn't come back exactly the same. It's a little bit different. There's been purification or karmic debris has departed. I'm not sure what, but somehow it changes for folks. The difference with the Satori experience is it's a deeper realization, and in my observation, it's because more of the individual consciousness is engaged. So there seems to be a tipping point, I call it the 51% rule. When more than 51% of consciousness is engaged in the awakening experience, then that can result in the Satori experience. And the main thing that I look for the same three components in each awakening: the sense of no self, the unity, the one love, and the recognition of true identity. Those would be true for both Kensho and Satori. But the Satori experience with a Kensho person, when they self-reference, they're still touching into the sense of me. And it's a little different after the experience of Kensho, but there's still a me that's there. And for the person that's had the Satori, there's still going to be a sense of self, but when they check in, they're going to find the foundation is no longer just the personality. The foundation is containing qualities of the Absolute. We each have qualities of the Absolute in our consciousness from birth, so we have access to these all the time. And for that person after the Satori, that's what they're experiencing. When I'll say to them, "Who am I?" a lot of what they'll share are qualities of the Absolute. They won't be saying, "Well, I live here, I'm this age," this kind of personality stuff. So it's a big difference when that happens. And again, for some people, there's a progression of a number of Kenshos before the Satori experience. Occasionally, the Satori experience is a first awakening. That's pretty rare, but it does happen. And so with each level of awakening, there's one more level I'll mention in a minute. With each level of awakening, there are personality issues that will be activated. There'll be a discongruity, a disharmony between the realization and the personality. And that becomes the material that we work post-Kensho or working personality material. The main advice I give to students is for them to watch for overreactions. Watch for where they blow up with anger at something that's really stupid and they know they shouldn't. Things like that, or have just a strong emotional reaction to some life event. And usually there's some personality structuring we can find, usually early life structure that's operating. As part of the process of working with a personality after awakening is that we're trying to work the material that's obvious, what I call the low-hanging fruit. And by doing this, we really convert these old unhealthy patterns and become more in line, harmonious with the Absolute. So a lot of our behavior gets to be more refined, less clunky, less me-driven. So it makes a difference in our life. So in the Buddhist viewpoint, we're producing less karma because we're operating less out of the ordinary sense of self and operating more from the movement of the absolute. And so with each, let's say, with each realization, there's going to be material that's worked, personal material. And I call this process the stair-step method. So someone typically takes a step, either realization or personality purification, and that prepares them for the next step, which is the opposite. So if it's realization, the next step is going to be personal material. And then when enough of that personal material is worked through, then there's a ripeness for awakening again. And then the next Kensho can happen. And that's going to highlight new personality material that's ready for work. So the process keeps going. And at some point when the process has been going on for a while, there's been a lot of purification of personality, and I mean working some very deep material. We can get access to the third level of realization called Daigo Tete, and the English translation is final or full enlightenment. And I say repeatedly in my teaching, I don't see that there is an end to awakening. There's always going to be more of the mystery than we can penetrate and know. And so that's always the potential, is for further realization. But the reason it's called final or full enlightenment is because one of the effects, one of the impacts is the sense of self drops as it does in Kensho and Satori, but it doesn't reemerge. The sense of self is gone. And in its place is the absolute. So rather than for the Kensho experience, it's still going to be personality. For the Satori experience, it's going to be true nature, seeing qualities of the absolute in our consciousness. And Daigo Tete, it's the absolute itself, is the self-referencing. If there's a turn in, that's what's met. But the Daigo Tete is a big realization because you have to work this issue that I call the core wound. The core wound is something that gets established when we're quite young, when we're infants, toddlers. And I subscribe to the psychological model that's called that babies are born in a dual unity. So they're born into this unity, the oneness, the undividedness of the love of the absolute in the presence. So the here-ness. The baby gets it. They don't differentiate. I've held my kids and grandkids, and holding that infant, the infant doesn't know there's a barrier, a boundary, that I'm contained. And you can feel that when you hold the babies. But at some point, the baby begins to realize that, in effect, dukkha, the suffering, is contained in this body, and the resolution of it is outside the body. And that begins the primary identity of body boundary. Whatever's from this skin in is me. This is where pain and hunger are felt. And out there is the good stuff. And I'm not in charge of the good stuff. So the baby decides that it really needs to invest in this birth family. If it doesn't, there could be a survival issue here. I may not survive if I don't get these people to be very invested in me. So each of us elects to turn away from this unity with the absolute and focus on the family and have the family take its place. And interestingly, as part of our psychology, we all take the turn away as a sign of that we're flawed. Something in us is damaged or broken, and we hold it that we were rejected, not that we elected to turn away. And this begins the core wound, some version of I'm worthless. Whether it's, and have people work issues, I'm bad, I'm unlovable. It's whatever you can think of along that line, somebody's working that issue at some point. But it's the sense, and it's the real belief in that. It's the conviction of the belief that really keeps that operating. Is I'm broken, I'm damaged, and I can't be fixed. That's really important. And that's one of the ways we hold it and why it's so hard to work, because we view it that this is unchangeable and we can't do anything with it. But over time we do. We work these, the absolute will come in and fill in as we stay with these felt personality deficiencies. We open up to the vulnerability. And in the vulnerability is where the quality of the absolute can come in and replace that personality dysfunction. The interesting thing of Daigo Teitei also is that it's the same process as Kensho and Satori, but it's slowed way down. Each segment of the Daigo Teitei is deliberate, discrete. One has to work the material and elect to continue. So it's very much a buy-in along the way, where Kensho and Satori happen in a flash typically, and often not when we're expecting it or know it's going to happen. The Daigo Teitei, it's very deliberate. So I think that's all I want to say about those. Any questions on any of that material? It depends.
Yeah.
For some people, the gradual you're talking about, that's the stair step. That's where they're working after Kensho. They're working the personal material, and you're right. There's little tastes of awakening that come along the way, but the big experience doesn't happen until a lot of that personality work is done. But it still happens in a flash. The experience itself is still quick, if that makes sense. Yeah, and you're right. It's presented. It normally would be a post-awakening teaching, but what I'm finding is that everybody benefits from working that material, and it does prime people for Kensho if they do work it. So that's why I put it in the book to do it. But it's where we have to learn the skill of being with the vulnerability before the reaction. There's always a vulnerability. Normally that a lot of us don't see it because we don't want to see it, because we have to do something about it. So it's easier to get angry or to have a blow up of some kind, or get really emotional in some fashion, than actually to be with the fact that, wow, I feel unseen. The waiter didn't notice me at all. And so I had to make a fuss for them to notice me. So I use a lot of restaurant examples. Yeah. Well, I worked in restaurants through college, so yeah. That's why I made you use your imagination. You see, so yeah. Bob's a restaurant owner, so that's why I'm teasing him. Yeah, but it absolutely can be used at any point. In fact, I've done it with some groups, and some people have had awakenings, some haven't, and everybody seems to have a good engagement. Yeah. Well, it's a survival instinct move. We begin at birth. We have a certain survival instinct physically. We know to try to protect the body, and later that extends to the self, the personality. We're wanting to protect the personality too. But for the infant just has a survival instinct, a bodily movement to where these are the people feeding me. I need to pay attention and I need them, or else this thing doesn't exist. So we begin to more and more turn. And at some point, we begin to invest in the family. I don't know if many of you know of the Enneagram. It's a very involved, complicated psychological, spiritual tool. One of the teachers I worked with, Sandra Maitri, is probably one of the leading people about the spiritual use. And there's 9 Enneatypes, and we all fall into one type principally. And what's interesting about it is that the infant somehow knows kind of the energy of the family, and so it selects an Enneatype that's going to fit in that family, that's not going to be in opposition. So it's fascinating that we all do this, and that really shapes our personality. My view is it's more the baby just is tracking the energy and sort of finds an opening and fills that opening. but it ends up establishing a lot of our sense of self from that, based on birth order and hierarchy of families and all these different things. So it's a fascinating process, but it's not conscious for the baby. I think it's really instinctual. But what I find fascinating is almost everybody blames themselves. I mean, everybody comes in with that core wound. As I mentioned, I'm unlovable, I'm bad, I'm broken, I'm worthless, I'm valueless, something like that. And only by returning to the absolute, by really activating those qualities in our consciousness, those functions, do we have an option for something different. And that's why we're here. It's because it's not only is it available, it's possible and likely. Anybody else? Well, we all approach the core wound from a distance. Again, we're looking for the low-hanging fruit, the something that irritates you today is where you start. Something happens, somebody coughs when you're in meditation and you're grumbly. Okay, well, that can even be an experience you work with. But none of us can go to the core wound without doing the low-hanging fruit first. It's like it builds a confidence, momentum, relationship with the absolute. And because the work, the core wound is incredibly hard because of the deep conviction we have of its truth. And we believe the whole world sort of revolves off of that single truth. Everybody knows I'm unlovable. They all know it, they just pretend. And so yeah, exactly. And I love when before Julie and I met and married, I dated a little bit, looking for her. And so married men take note. That's how you do it. And I always thought it was funny because you do a couple of dates and everybody is on their best behavior. And, the experience I had, the women, like they wouldn't eat much, oh, just a side salad. That's all they need, and one cube of ice. That's it. It's like, okay, like third or fourth that, bring the ribs. Let's have some steak over here. They're going for it. But what I find funny too is around that time, people start telling you their shit. Like before that, they're all perfect. Everybody's, oh, whatever you like, I like, and then it's like, oh, I hate that. We're never going there. Don't do that, And so why it is we feel comfortable sharing our dirtiest laundry like the third or fourth date? It's like the most intimate thing we can share. This is my flaw, and we want to see, are they going to run? We think they are, and then they don't, and they surprise us in some level. But it's interesting, when people are more functional, then that begins meeting too. So that's where it gets really interesting. If you have people who are spiritual practitioners, because that can be really very supportive too. Well, what I'm saying is we're identifying the low-hanging fruit. So we're identifying the overreaction today. That's what we're doing. But what puts the low-hanging fruit in your face? Okay. That's going to be the absolute. There's going to be a wisdom about what you work. Sometimes it feels like it's real easy, and sometimes it's like, why would they give me this? It's terribly hard. But we're ready. That's why I have confidence when somebody is working an issue, it's appropriate and timely for them to work. I don't ever wonder if it's the right time. It's like it's here. Okay. So we should engage it. Yeah.
It's not me.
No, ultimately it's not us doing any of this. That's part of the delusion is we think we're affecting all these things and we're affecting very little. Well, and the funny thing is all of our cultures and societies have all these ways to avoid being with the core wound. Every commercial, every form of entertainment, every activity we can do is all designed to keep us away from feeling that. Particularly things like movies and shows and all of that. All entertainment is a lot of ways trying to keep us focused on the good stuff and not the bad stuff. But it is necessary work, and this is why if you're walking a spiritual path, it's for grown-ups. It's not for children. You can't come here and think you're going to escape having to deal with your shit because you're not. It's going to be served up to you daily. So you have to engage what's here and work it. That's how the system works. And it's hard. We work stuff we don't want to work, things that are awful, memories that are difficult. You become truer and truer who you are. And I've said before, it gets very challenging because our birth family in particular is very invested in us staying in our role. And when we start changing that role, it makes them very uncomfortable. This is the agreement. That's your seat. You can't sit there. You got to sit here. That's it. And so we have to break those patterns. That's part of the freedom and liberation. Doesn't mean it's always easy. Sometimes it's very hard. But ultimately, if you're on the path of truth, you're on the path of truth. That becomes more important than holding up the falseness of the personality. All right, let's do a little meditation.